Welcome to Alchemical Science. I'm Jordan, an open source researcher who investigates mostly either very old, very new, or very esoteric fields of science, like radiant energy, unified physics, and the energy systems of plants, soil, and the human body. So my wife and I have been organic market gardeners for about 7-8 years now, and about once a year or increasingly often lately, we've been trying to plant by the moon's phases or find some kind of rhythm that we can base our planting plan on. And so I've checked out like a ton of different apps and pretty much all the information I can find on the internet around this, and every time we get frustrated or give up because the apps don't explain the calculations they're making to tell you, that this is a good day to plant this crop or whatnot. There's really no explanation of, what's going on behind the scenes and why you're doing this. And I've found that a lot of them just contradict each other, which becomes really confusing. And if you don't know what's going on, you wonder what's the point of doing this. So after a fair bit of research, I found this, and it's the 2023 Astro Calendar by Brian Keats. And a lot of other biodynamic farmers around the world, not just in Australia, use this. This is for the Southern Hemisphere. He used to do a Northern Hemisphere edition as well, but in his other notes there are ways to convert the calculations and still be able to use the calendar as a basis for planting and harvesting and all the other kind of tasks it talks about in the Northern Hemisphere. So what's really great about this Astro Calendar is that it takes account of all of the different lunar rhythms and some of the planetary ones, and of course the sun's rhythms as well. And he explains it incredibly clearly. It's very, very well presented. So in this video I'm going to go through this Astro Calendar and show you first just each aspect of the calendar, because it is worth breaking down, and I know a lot of people reading is not really their forte these days. It's easier to kind of just watch someone explain something. So I thought I'd just go through that, despite how well Brian's explained it in his introduction to the calendar and in his guide, which I'll link to both of those in the description. But then also just go through, because he doesn't actually really suggest any particular method to go through using the calendar. And I understand exactly why he does that, because he wants to leave it open-ended, because this is a very open-ended science. There is so many factors to consider, and every planting date is essentially unique. You can't really just come up with a simple methodology to go, you can plant all, roots on these days, all fruits on these days, and we'll go through that. But I'm just going to go through the example of the first planting I planned when I got this calendar last week, and it took me a couple days to read through it all, and then about an hour to kind of just plan out this first date for when to plant my garlic. So I thought I'd go through and use that as an example, and also show actually what's happening with this fantastic series of apps that I've found, including CosmicWatch, which will really demonstrate a lot of the concepts and what's actually happening with the lunar rhythms, the sun's rhythm, and how they're interacting with Earth, to be able to give you a really good visual representation of some of the examples in the calendar. And also showing another app that I've been using for a while now called Deluxe Moon, which will just convert a lot of these times in here into your time zone and just make things a whole lot easier if you're not based on the same latitude as Sydney, Australia, which I'm down below Melbourne, above Melbourne, but most of them are pretty similar to mine, but I will still use Deluxe Moon to be able to see what's actively happening in the sky. So taking a quick look at the calendar, you can see this is truly both a beautiful and a detailed creation here. And so I'm going to go through each step of what all of this means. And it looks incredibly complex, but you'll see that there is a simple methodology to be able to decide on planting times based on what Brian mentions in here, Steiner's Biodynamics agriculture course, and the work of Maria Thun and others in the biodynamic field and researchers who've done some experimentation with this. Although, you know, it's not hugely scientifically supported by modern science because there's just been no very few studies done, and it's quite intricate. So I guess this is what it's about for me. We're going to do some much more long-term field studies, really seeing if we can observe the effects of these planetary influences in the future. But anyway, jumping into the calendar, let's break it down. Alright, so breaking down this calendar step by step, because there's a lot going on here. This is May 2023, which is the month I'm recording this video. And we can see right here, 1, 2, 3, 4 rows, moon and horizon. And we've got the rise time, the set time, the overhead time, or medium coli, MC, and the underfoot time, or imum coli, IC. And the rise time is obviously when the moon is rising on the horizon, and this will be only, these times on the calendar will only apply if you're, you know, of the same latitude as Sydney, Australia, which you're probably not. So I'll give you a way to convert those over in a moment with a good app. But for the moment, the rise time is when it's rising on the horizon in the east. The overhead time is when it's at its peak, its zenith in the sky above. Its set time is when it's setting in the west, obviously, and its underfoot time is when it's on the other side of the world, at its, you know, other peak. So each moon day lasts around 24 hours and 50 minutes, and it has 4 distinct beats to it, according to Brian's notes. And so these are reflected in the weather. So basically there's more of a tendency for cloud formation when the moon is low below the horizon. And there's often a clearing of the skies when the moon reaches its peak in the sky above the horizon. So the times of moonset and moonrise are often periods of change in weather conditions. So there's a full explanation in Brian's guide. But yeah, basically start to keep an eye on the relation of the daily lunar rhythm and on the weather and the ambient conditions at the time. So if you're not equal in latitude to Sydney, Australia, then you will probably want to use this app, which is really fantastic. It's called Deluxe Moon, and it's got a lot of information about these lunar cycles in there. So one of them we can see right down the bottom here is daily. It will tell you the moon rise, the moon zenith, which is its peak in the sky above you, and the moon set there. So it gives you that information as well as a lot of other information which we will use in a moment. So to take a quick look at the moon's daily rhythm on CosmicWatch, we can see that the moon is just here below the horizon, and this is in real time. This is actually right now, today. And if we speed it up, we can see the moon rise. And somewhere around its zenith in the sky, and then heading back down to set on the western horizon, and then we can follow it down underfoot and see it reaching its peak underfoot as well, its imum coli. So obviously this daily rhythm of the moon influences weather cycles, and that's worth taking note of. Farming is very reliant on the weather, so the more data you can have to make your forecasting decisions there, the better. So another of those daily rhythms is that the Earth has its own inhalation and exhalation cycle. So from around 3 a.m. to 3 p.m., the Earth is exhaling, so mists are rising. And from around 3 p.m. to 3 a.m., it's inhaling, and we're getting dewfall and contraction. So that, along with the moon's daily rhythm, kind of constitute what we should take note of on a daily basis, and just see how these things relate to what's actually going on in the sky and in the weather. So going back to the calendar, we've also got our monthly cycles, and this constitutes most of what's going on here. So the first and most obvious monthly lunar cycle is the phase cycle. So this is the light and dark cycle, or the synodic rhythm with the sun. So we can see where this is on the calendar. These, we can see the moon waxing here and then waning here. We can see our full moon here, and we can see our half moon marked here. So this is probably the most well-known cycle that people may have used before. And so according to many in the biodynamic spheres, including Maria Thun and Brian himself to some extent, with, many notes about all the other cycles that you need to consider, will say that planting up to the period coming up to the full moon, so a few days before a full moon, or this period leading up to full moon, will result in quicker germination, bulkier initial plant growth, and all of these things are obviously desirable for farmers. And so there are some notes there, and they'll come up later, For example, some other conditions can play in and mean that a full moon may actually mean extreme weather conditions, such as a supermoon, and things like that. So it's not cut and dry once again, but this is another of the phases that we need to consider, and that lasts around 29.53 days. So taking a quick look at CosmicWatch to see what's happening with the moon and sun in this phase rhythm. So we can see the moon is here and the sun is up here, and this is in real time again, so I'll just speed it up. Alright, and you can see the moon's phase changing. Currently it's waxing as it makes that little dance with the sun there. Speed it up a little more. And if I make this a geocentric view, geocentric ecliptic, sorry, then you can see this all the more easy. So we can see the phase cycle of the moon changing very quickly there in relation to the sun, so that's at 7 days per second. Generally, it's not recommended to plant exactly on the full moon, as in everything is kind of in the midst of change at those times, so you're going to potentially get unpredictable results, and you won't necessarily know what is happening, but leading up to full moon is the ideal time to plant, according to most biodynamic farmers, assuming the other lunar phases and weather and moisture conditions are good. So next we've got the Ascension and Dissension cycle, which is marked on the calendar here. And so this goes, the cycle lasts about 27.3216 days, and it's referred to as the tropical rhythm. And Brian, in his notes here, says it can be imagined as the dance between the hemispheres. So essentially it's a mini cycle of the sun's varying heights from summer to winter when it swings between the Tropics of Cancer and the Tropics of Capricorn. So if we look at these two diagrams here, you can see the moon varies from north to south across the equator towards the Tropics of Capricorn and the Tropic of Cancer. And so on the calendar, we've got this section which is marked from the sky view, or the astronaut's view of what's happening. And then down below, we've got the view of what this looks like in our actual sky in reference to us. So if we're looking at it on the world map, we see it either the moon either descending south towards the Tropic of Capricorn, or we can see it descending north to the Tropic of Cancer. And then from our view, we'll either see the sun low in the sky,
when we're seeing it on the other side of the world. So, of course, this is from my place in the southern hemisphere. It'll be opposite for anyone in the northern. So when it's in the northern hemisphere, I'm going to see it low in the sky in the southern hemisphere, and I'm going to see the moon high in the sky in the southern hemisphere when the moon is down this way in the south. And then these points on the calendar here are where the moon is crossing the equator each time. And so on the calendar here, we can also see the sun's ascension and dissension cycle. So again, from the sky, the astronaut view, we can see that the sun is moving north up towards the Tropic of Cancer, but from the ground view, our view of the sky here, we can see that the sun is moving south in the sky, so lower in the sky, sorry. And then we can see that same relation with the moon on the calendar here, that the moon's position in the sky higher here, and it's meeting the lower peak of the moon's descent into the Tropic of Capricorn. And you'll see here also that he's noted where peak south and peak north occur here. Another little note is this nature timeline that occurs below the sun's position in the sky here, and this is just a really good reference because it shows you these different kind of fertility cycles going on, you know, when different animals are being born or when different animals are migrating. And so again, you know, it's just about drawing all of these different correspondences with what's happening with the sun, with the moon, with the planets. And so for us in the southern hemisphere, and this will just be opposite again if you're in the northern, when the moon comes down closer to the Tropic of Capricorn here, and it's more over Australia, then we're actually going to get like a mini spring and summer, at least, you know, with that particular rhythm of the moon. And as the moon moves up towards the Tropic of Cancer, away from us again, we're going to have, you know, essentially a mini winter and autumn. So that's just a reflection, a kind of micro cycle of what's happening with the sun's macro cycle with the seasons that we all know very well. So the moon also has similar kind of seasons, and this is kind of, I guess, you know, the seasons of the moon to some extent. So once again, we can use that as another determination, and we'll go through that when I talk about my garlic planting and each step I went through to be able to determine that date. And so Brian mentions in his notes here that the ascending periods are considered favorable for grafting and the application of 501 biodynamic spray, but not for pruning when open wounds could bleed too much. In the descending period, which lasts a fortnight, the increased vitality within the soil makes it appropriate for activities like spraying of 500, compost making, and transplanting. It's remarkable how well plants transplant at these times, especially when carried out in the evenings. Maria Thun advocated the planting of all seeds during lunar ascension, whereas others might only sow root crops at this contracting into the earth time. So a few things to note there, but this is another lunar rhythm that we can tie into our final decision on when to plant something now. So another quick look at CosmicWatch to see what's happening here. We can see our Tropic of Capricorn down here, Tropic of Cancer up here, and our moons currently up near the Tropic of Cancer at the moment. So if I speed this up to see what's happening. Alright, we can see our moon traveling between the two tropics, and that's at 7 days per second. So going pretty fast, but you can see that it's moving around quite a bit there, and that is that particular rhythm. So next we've got the Acidal Cycle, which is the moon's ecliptic orbit around Earth, and that lasts 27.55 days. So these 2 points are marked on the calendar here as perigee, the moon's closest point to the Earth, and also apogee, which is the moon's furthest point from Earth. And you'll see that he's also noted how far and how close they were to Earth under those two notes there as well, so 369,344 kilometers for perigee. And you can reference this over a longer period. I think there's a much longer cycle that goes on here where these distances will vary. And that also has an effect. You know, the closer it is going to be to Earth, the more effect that phase rhythm is going to have on our plantings. So I think that's why it's worth noting how far away the Earth is at any kind of given year or given period. So basically, when the Moon is farthest from the Earth at apogee, levitational forces are weakest and the forces of gravity are at their strongest. And when the Moon is closest to the Earth at perigee, lunar and levitational forces are at their strongest, and that's going to result in quicker germination, bulkier initial growth. So if it's combined with full moon forces, things can become excessive, and you may get extreme weather conditions. So again, you know, it could be a really good thing to be planting near a perigee, but it could be a negative thing if it's occurring, you know, within a day of full moon, or if, you know, if those rhythms are syncing up and you're going to get really quite out of control forces going on. So another cycle that we can tie in there at the end to plan this garlic planting. So taking a quick look at CosmicWatch, we can see this ecliptic orbit of the Moon. So you can see that it's following the round purple circle at the moment, but it's just starting to start its ecliptic orbit here and make that varying path around the Earth. So we can see it's closer at some point and it's further away at some point in its orbit. Alright, so next we have the Nodal Cycle, which occurs over 27.21 days. And you can see that this is the relationship between the Moon, the Earth, and the Sun. And the nodes are where they meet on the same plane. So if we look at the calendar, we'll be able to see these two nodes marked as the south here and the north here. And so you can find those 2 points where the Moon, the Sun, and the Earth are all on the same plane. And eclipses only occur on these nodes. So not every node is an eclipse, as you can see, but an eclipse will only occur when all three of the planets are on the same plane. So an interesting note from Vedic astrology is that these are the two planets, or shadow planets, Ugra Grahas, that they call Rahu and Ketu, which are mathematical points, but called the shadow planets in Vedic astrology if you're interested in that and want to check out the correspondences. And so as a general rule, gardeners avoid planting 2 hours before and after a lunar node, and 12 hours either side of an eclipse or a planetary node. So you can do your own research there and find out more, but that is generally what's been done so far. So those are the rules I'm going to be following as a guide there. And so if I go on to CosmicWatch and go on to the Zodiac mode, then I will be able to see these 2 points marked out there with the other planets. So you can see one here and one here, that being the north, Rahu, and that being the south, Ketu. The head and the tail of the dragon, as they say. Alright, so for the last monthly lunar cycle, we have the sidereal cycle, which occurs over 27.3215 days. And this is the Zodiac Rhythm. This is the Moon's movement through the Zodiac. So on the calendar, that's marked in this Moon in Zodiac row, and you'll see the signs of the Zodiac laid out on the corresponding dates there. If you don't know the signs or what they represent, you'll find that in the key on the back of the calendar. Otherwise, they're very available and pretty easy and quick to learn. But there's also each sign is a different color, and these are marked to one of the four classical elements, so Aristotle's elements. And I believe these designations were given by Maria Thun, but they pretty much seem to align with a lot of other classical work in this area. Like people have been working with assigning these elements to many different things for a long time, and I've found that the ones assigned to the Zodiac and the ones assigned to gardening and these type of tasks have been pretty accurate. You can definitely see the correspondences if you're versed in these things. So we'll get back to how the elements affects things in a moment. So to demonstrate this is another quite amazing app called Stellarium, and this can be used as VR as well as just using it like I am now. But we can see over here, this red line is the ecliptic. So this is where the sun's path and the planets and the moon follow a band around this ecliptic. So this is a really beautiful app. You can see the landscape here. We would see planets rising over this throughout the day, and then we're able to track their paths live through the different signs of the zodiac, you know. So for example, we can see Mars here, one of the few planets in the sky right at the moment, but Mars is clearly in Gemini. So when you hear someone say Mars is in Gemini, that's what they mean. Mars is in Gemini. So check out Stellarium if you want to be able to view your night sky like this and just start to get a good bearing on where the planets are, help you find them when you're just going out to do some naked eye astronomy. But if we check out CosmicWatch, we also have a great view here, this same sidereal zodiac view as last time. And if you want to get the sidereal zodiac rather than the tropical zodiac, check out Brian's work if you want to know more about the difference between those. But you just have to go into the settings and into the about section, and then there's an advanced settings here that you can go and change to the sidereal zodiac. Otherwise you will get totally different results on this, and you'll need to do that with any other app as well. Make sure it is using the same zodiac as the calendar, because there's tropical and sidereal, and they're not the same. They're calculated differently. They're both relevant, but I prefer the fixed sidereal myself, which is what Brian's using in the calendar, and some others that I'm interested in using the same system. So we can see here anyway all of our different planets. I can put the planet names on. There we go. This is such a fantastic app. And so there we can see what planet is in what sign around the zodiac. They're all marked out there. And as a final option, you can also use Moon Deluxe. And if you go to this zodiac view here, you'll also be able to see where the moon is in the zodiac as well. But obviously it's a whole lot more detailed here on CosmicWatch, and I recommend grabbing all of these apps. I think CosmicWatch is about $10, otherwise the others are free. So yeah, they're a great complement to the calendar and can help you visualize what's going on and also see what's happening if you're in a different time zone to the calendar. So what does the moon traveling through the zodiac mean for biodynamic growing? So we've got this four-part plant focus row here, and you'll see, you know, the fruit and the root and the flower and the leaf, and these correspond to Aristotle's 4 elements that Maria Thun's used, assigned to these zodiac signs. So you'll see that the fire, you know, the red colored moon in zodiac signs will correspond with a planting day. And so once again, it doesn't mean that's just a planting day. It means look at the other cycles, and then you can make a decision. But that, you know, fire is, or this day has the moon in a fire sign, so that is generally corresponded with better fruit growth or better growth of plants that are ruled by a fire sign. And of course, you know, the planets, if you want to take it further, you could go and look at, you know, where each planet is located, and you know, astrology and that kind of stuff is really, really bottomless. So, you know, I'm sure you could continue to draw finer and finer correspondences. It's all kind of divisible, but as far as things go, I think this is a really good system, a good method, and it corresponds with a lot of the alchemical work I've been doing, a lot of the classical stuff that I've read around this kind of stuff. So I'm happy to follow this along with the other cycles using yeah, this 4-part plant focus as a good general guide here. And so it's the fire signs will correspond with fruiting. The earth signs will correspond with roots. The flowering signs will correspond with air, and the leaf signs with water. So that's, yeah, those correspondences there. They're laid out in the back in the key as well. So there is a second page to the calendar as well. So you can see this is just down below the main part of the calendar. And Brian's included a mid-month sky view there, some more information on the planets that I've got to look into and understand more, and just put some of the major events that are happening there as well. And he's put stuff that may be kind of, maybe extreme weather events or something to note in red as well, and also given a little brief on his Skywatch and some information from Rudolf Steiner's Sol calendar as well, which is also published on Brian's website, which is quite interesting. So there's a lot more info there to check out. Great stuff to reference with the apps as well. And the calendar's absolutely loaded with information. There's a lot to go through here, and I'll still be looking through it for a long time, trying to understand more and more and add more and more into the depth of understanding what's happening with the planets and the moon at the time of plantings. Alright, so finally, let's go through and see how I decided to plant my garlic using these different monthly lunar cycles. So, first of all, it needs to be planted as soon as possible. We've left it a little late. It needs to go in soon. If we're to get a good crop, according to our normal weather conditions and what we've learned over a few years of farming in this area, moisture, weather, just the general seasons, and the sun's movement and patterns in winter here. So we need to do it soon, as early as possible. So that's our first consideration, and it's an important one. So our next consideration, to just take things logically and easily, would be when's the next full moon? It always seems to be good planting heading up to full moon. That's what we want to do. So the next full moon appears to be on the 4th of June. So Sunday the 4th of June is the next full moon. So we can just note that down for the moment. That suits me. That's pretty close by. And then we'll look at the other phase rhythms and see if this will affect our date. So going down to the Ascension and Dissension cycle, this is good. The moon is traveling south towards the Tropic of Capricorn, which is good for germination and bulkier initial growth. So again, this seems to be a really good period to plant so far. But looking at the other cycles, we've got the Acidal Cycle here. So the moon is on its way to perigee. So it's closest to Earth on the 6th of June. Which, they're a few days apart, so we're not seeing perigee and full moon happen at the same time, which might mean a supermoon, or, well, not might mean, that does mean a supermoon, and potentially extreme or volatile weather conditions. So it's good that they're a few days apart here, but that they're occurring fairly close together. The moon is heading in the right direction for faster germination, bulkier initial growth. So far, we are looking at this first period here, first, second, third of June, leading up to the full moon as ideal planting days. But then we have the Nodal Cycle. So there is a lunar node here on the 1st. There's no eclipse, so we don't need to leave a day around that, really, only a few hours. So it's not a major issue, so we can probably kind of ignore that for the moment. We obviously plant around it. But next we need to look at our zodiac signs. So garlic, although it's growing underground, it's not a root crop. This would be considered more of a fruiting crop. And certainly if we look to Culpepper's Complete Herbal, or some other planetary reference guides for herbalism, they suggest that garlic is ruled by fire. So we're probably looking for the moon being in a fire sign at this period. We don't have one here in June, but we're not in June yet. We have a little bit of time before. We were just trying to get as close to our full moon as possible. So if we go back to May, we can see we have Leo, a fire sign, starting at 3:06 a.m. on the 27th of May, and the moon remains in Leo until 3:09 p.m. on the 29th of May. So this could be a good period. It's a little just after apogee and further away from perigee, but we are heading towards perigee in that initial growth period. The full moon's occurring 1 week afterwards. So really this seems like probably our best time so far to plant on either the 27th, 28th, or 29th of May there. Where all conditions are heading towards being favorable over the first week and a half of growth. And we're also in the fire sign, which rules garlic there. So one last thing to consider is that we can see these little symbols down the bottom of the calendar here. And these are oppositions or trines. And although Brian's notes do talk about them a little, I haven't fully got my head around them yet. I did hear in a podcast interview that he said the moon opposing Saturn is a positive thing, is favorable. So I'm not too worried about my garlic planting, but this is a question I'll have to ask or do deeper research into about how the planets opposing or being at certain angles to each other influences planting. So just a couple notes from Brian on that. The trines, our planets, are 120 degrees apart from each other, as are the elements of the constellations. If one planet is in a fire element, the other must be too. And nodes, we've already discussed. Oppositions, this occurs when two heavenly bodies, i.e. the moon and Saturn, are directly opposite each other from the observer on Earth perspective. This implies that when one is rising, the other one is setting. So yeah, apparently this moon's opposition to Saturn is favorable. Whether or not this is common for opposing planets, I'm not sure. I'll need to find out more about that. But otherwise, that is how I got to the conclusion of planning on these dates for my garlic. Like I say, let me know how you're using the calendar if you've been using it for many years. This is the 36th edition, so it's really quite an epic work, and Brian's obviously got a lot of experience in working with these rhythms and explaining it logically. So I really suggest getting your hands on a copy of this calendar, no matter where you are in the world. And you can also check out, Brian's got another little published pamphlet about biodynamics, which serves as a really good introductory guide. It actually really got me thinking about these things, and initially when I read this about the interactions of carbon, silica, and metals, all of these different factors that I've been playing with in the long term in a lot of different fields.
All right, so that's a bit of an overview of the calendar, how I'm going to be using it, and just trying to kind of break down what's all happening there. I'm also going to be using it for my alchemical laboratory works. It corresponds with the work that I've been reading from Frater Albertus and Robert Allen Bartlett, the American Rosicrucian alchemists. So I'll be using it to determine good days for harvesting, doing distillation, things like that. And also, because it's using a fixed sidereal system in the calendar, and Brian just explains these phenomena so well, it's also kind of opened up thinking about Nrsimha Rao's work, Vedic Astrology and Integrated Approach, and which is a topic for another day. That's pretty complicated stuff. But yeah, I highly recommend grabbing a copy of this calendar from Brian's website, and you can also check out his biodynamic guide he's got there and a few interviews with him. Really fantastic stuff. It's really good even if you're in the Northern Hemisphere. As I say, there's a guide which I'll link to. But that's all for now. Thanks for watching.